Okay, so far so good. Steady at 1600. Looks like this cloud is lowering. I'll just fly through to the other side. There must be some pretty good ice in this cloud. My airspeed's falling off, so I'll just add a little more power. This doesn't look good. I feel like I'm in a bowl of milk. What is happening? Where's the horizon?
What in the world?
I've lost all my airspeed? I gotta turn back. Wait a minute. It's not turning.
Hey, buddy! Hey, buddy, are you okay in there? Buddy, you just flew into a snowbank. Darn pilot.
What you've just witnessed is based on a true story. Unfortunately, there are hundreds of similar stories just like it. For some, the pilots weren't so lucky. Regardless of your level of flying expertise, atmospheric situations can sneak up on you. Weather phenomena known as flat light and whiteout conditions can do just that, putting the pilot and passengers in an insidious situation. There has been much discussion and controversy about the actual definitions of the terms flat light and whiteout. For our training purposes, we will not use these terms interchangeably, but will provide a distinct definition for each, as each condition warrants a different navigational response. These conditions occur in various parts of the world, primarily in snow-covered areas, but can occur in dust, sand, mudflats, or glassy water. Whiteout, as defined in meteorological terms, is when a person becomes engulfed in a uniformly white glow.
In a whiteout condition, it's like flying into a milk bowl type effect, because you lose all peripheral vision, you lose the horizon, and all of a sudden everything becomes opaque from the bottom, where it's indistinct ground. You don't know how far above the ground, and it just becomes indistinct above the cockpit, around the aircraft.
In several aviation accidents occurring in snow-covered areas, this condition has been a major factor. This will be the emphasis for our training. Another term you may hear is self-induced whiteout. This effect typically occurs when a helicopter takes off or lands on a snow-covered area. This can happen on the sunniest, brightest day with good contrast everywhere. The rotor downwash picks up the particles and recirculates them through the rotor system. This effect can vary in intensity depending on the amount of light on the surface. There can be a complete loss of visual cues. This can be disastrous if the pilot has not prepared for this immediate loss of visibility. Flat light, on the other hand, is a similar but altogether different optical illusion. Although not as severe as whiteout, it's more difficult to define.
First thing is, when you run into a flat light condition, you want to be able to recognize that you're getting a flat light condition. You might be able to see the horizon and from the air, but looking down to the ground, it's tough to judge the height above the ground, and that's a flat light condition. You can see a horizon, but looking down, you have no idea of depth perception. You don't know whether you're 5 feet above the ground or 500 feet above the ground.
Some ophthalmologists refer to flat light as sector or partial whiteout. Often it is possible to operate an aircraft safely in flat light conditions using good judgment and proper planning. Flat light conditions are usually accompanied by overcast skies, inhibiting good visual clues and causing any detail or contrast to be lost. Such conditions can completely obscure features of the terrain, creating an inability to distinguish distances and closure rates. When maneuvering in flat light, it can give the illusion that you are ascending or descending when in fact you may be flying level.
What you're seeing here is a similar situation on a snow-covered lake. The box on the right is in a flat light condition, and the one on the left is on a clear day. The one on top actually shows the touchdown of the plane. Now the tracks in the snow are actually there in both landings. You can see the tracks on a clear day because of the good contrast, but the tracks don't show up in a flat light situation. Therefore, your depth perception is lost.
The flat light phenomenon is very hard to visualize if you've never experienced it before.
One of the most important things about operating in flat light is to make sure the conditions don't deteriorate on you that can lead to a whiteout. And if things go bad to that extent, then the whiteout certainly is a hazard that you have to be able to transition to instruments. The aircraft has to be equipped. The pilot should be current in instrument activities, and then normally you can save your bacon. But in general, flat light, you can operate in flat light almost indefinitely, but sometimes it'll make landings more difficult, if not impossible. And even the wisest thing is to say, no, we're not going to land in that place today. But on a given day with different light conditions, it'd be a perfectly suitable landing area.
November 1979. Air New Zealand DC-10 on a sightseeing flight from New Zealand to Antarctica crashes into a mountain during whiteout conditions, killing all 257 people on board. June 1999. A sightseeing flight in Alaska, 7 souls on board. The aircraft crashes into a mountain at 130 knots. There were no survivors. Probable cause? Flat light conditions and spatial disorientation. September 1999, near Juneau, Alaska. 3 helicopters crash within a 2-mile radius of one another. All rotorcraft sustained substantial damage. Flat light is listed as the major factor in all 3 accidents. Rescue operations were most difficult and delayed as a result of weather conditions. On a photo flight mission near Girdwood, Alaska, on a blue sky day, this pilot went from a sunny area to a shaded mountain ridge. Flat light conditions caused the pilot to lose depth perception and scrape the ridge area. The pilot landed safely, but with much internal damage to the helicopter.
Many helicopter operators today prefer to shoot an approach to the helicopter to a high hover over the area. If there's any blowing snow to be encountered or anything like that, with a good reference point already picked out, maybe a line of spruce trees or some type of rock outcrop or something that's not going to disappear in the blowing snow, that with a high hover, if they'll hold their position and wait for the rotor wash to take the surface and clean it up, and then they could continue the vertical descent. Normally they would have the landing light turned on to where it'll provide some additional reference to when the surface is coming in proximity and real bad white light, but they'd always have a point of reference that there wouldn't be any question about losing it in any type of blowing snow.
The Federal Aviation Regulations in Section 91.157 address special VFR weather minimums, indicating particular exceptions for helicopters, including equipping the aircraft with proper operative equipment. Remember, flat light and whiteout conditions are insidious. They are unforgiving and have taken many lives. Don't allow complacency or familiarity to cause you to disregard standard operating procedures or to ignore the fact that conditions can and do constantly change. Remember the 5 Ps. Proper planning prevents poor performance. Good planning does not preclude that you will encounter flat light or whiteout conditions.
Well, we don't know exactly what happened. We know we have an accident, and that's about as far as we are with the investigation. This is the preliminary stage. It'll be a while before we have a probable cause or anything like that.
To avoid becoming a statistic, here are some suggested tools to help you through such unique and sometimes treacherous flying conditions. To get the best advice about local flying conditions, check with local fixed-based operators, airmen associations, FAA's flight service stations, and other pilots who are located in the area where you plan on traveling. Transport Canada serves as Canada's Aeronautical Commission. Use their experience to your benefit. Check all available weather information. Study weather trends regularly and understand what they mean, particularly to a geographic area. Be aware of the effects of high, thin overcast from approaching weather systems. Good pilot reports, when given frequently, provide great reliability. Ask for them and give them often.
Pilot report, 3,000 feet. Visibilities generally 15 to 20 miles, and smooth ride.
Do not allow yourself to be forced or persuaded into a situation that is questionable.
I think you honestly take off with the attitude you're just going to look at it and see, and it's pretty good, and you keep going, and pretty soon you're maybe past the halfway mark, and it's still fair, and you keep going, and pretty soon you're closer to the destination than going home, turn around, and just that added maybe self-induced pressure to complete the trip will go ahead and put you into a situation that you're not really wanting to be in.
Set yourself some limits when experiencing flat light conditions and stick to them.
Bursal minimums are probably the best thing that will that you can use to keep yourself alive, and that you know when you reach those minimums, and you're not forced into doing something else that maybe you didn't want to do. And then you got to have a plan to get out. You know, what would happen if, in fact, I can't do this? Where am I going to go? What am I going to do? Which way am I going to turn? Am I going to turn into a hill in a low visibility situation? Those kinds of things.
It is said that the closer you are to your destination, the less likely you are to turn around in adverse weather conditions. Regardless of the kind of equipment you have, navigation can be extremely demanding in a mountainous area. With all pertinent information available, takeoff into a whiteout condition is not recommended unless the flight is conducted under instrument rules. In flat light conditions, it may be possible to depart but not return to the departure area. During takeoff, make sure you have a reference point. Do not lose sight of that until you have a departure reference in view. Be prepared to return to the takeoff reference if the departure reference doesn't come into view. The following equipment can help raise the margin of safety when a pilot has degrading visual clues: artificial horizon, vertical speed indicator, heading indicator, advanced instrumentation, radar altimeters, global positioning systems, GPS, pressure-sensitive altimeter, and VOR. Use everything possible that's available to you. Another recommendation is the use of special colored glasses when flying in flat light. Realize that no single type of eyewear is ideal for every pilot. Other variables may be taken into consideration: age, light sensitivity, ambient lighting conditions, and the type of flying. In some situations, sunglasses are not suitable for any pilot at any time. Besides pilots, flat light is a common concern for snow skiers and those working in snow conditions. One way that skiers compensate for this lack of visual contrast and depth of field loss is by using amber-tinted lenses, also known as blue blockers. What happens when the pilot realizes that all visual references are lost?
Exercise extreme control with your airplane, and I know it's kind of hard to explain, but a lot of pilots aren't, most pilots aren't familiar with whiteout conditions, and they fly into whiteout. And the adage is that if you inadvertently go into whiteout, you do your 180-degree turn to get out of it. And that's normally as far as that really goes, as far as training.
He must then trust the instruments, execute a 180, start looking for outside references, and above all, fly the aircraft. It's understood that pilots must use extreme care when descending into areas of limited contrast during periods of flat light. Use intermediate reference points, in addition to checkpoints along each leg of the route for course confirmation and timing. The lower the ambient light, the more reference points a pilot should use, since these flat light conditions can impair your judgment to distance and altitude. It's easy to get low on final approach and touch down too early. The opposite is also true. The consequences of faring too high may be equally disastrous. For airport landings, look for other features around the airport or approach path that can be used in determining depth perception. Such features might include buildings, towers, vehicles, or other aircraft. Use something that can provide you with a sense of height above the ground, in addition to orientating you to the runway. Be cautious of snowdrifts and snowbanks and any features that can distinguish the edge of the runway. Look for subtle changes in snow texture to identify ridges or changes in snow depth. In the event of off-airport landings, several factors to consider are overflight and the use of markers. Pilots have noted using a number of different types of objects to gain their reference, such as weighted flags, smoke bombs, red shop bags, dye markers, Kool-Aid, tree branches, or trees. Use whatever you must to create the contrast you need. Natural references are best, using small trees, rocks, snow ribs, etc. Natural references must be available to judge the terrain slope, your height above the snow, distance and closing speed. If no natural references are present, then find a more suitable location to land. If you are able to land, select a suitable reference point before committing to a landing. The references should be as close to touchdown as possible. Be prepared for potential uneven or sloped areas on touchdown, especially if you are in the mountains. With snow cover, it is difficult to determine the deepness of the snow and what areas are level. Dropping items from the aircraft to use as reference points should be used as a visual aid only and not as the primary landing reference. Unless the materials are biodegradable, be sure to retrieve them after use. Be prepared to abort the landing if blowing snow obscures your landing reference. Make your decision early. Do not assume that you will be able to pick up a lost reference when you get closer. Be especially cautious when flying from sunlight into shade. Never put yourself in a position where no references exist.
The big question is, how do you determine what the risks are and what your personal limitations are going to be? And a good way to start is by, if you haven't been to an area yet, call an FBO and ask to talk to their chief pilot. Call the FAA and find out some information about the area you're flying into and ask them what their personal limitations are, and then set your own limitations. And once you set your limitations, you shouldn't deviate from that, especially once you're in flight. Once you're in flight and flying and you've set a limitation, don't change it, because it'll lead to another change and another change, and therefore you just threw your limitations away.
Here are some other pilot-inspired techniques that can be used to lower the risk associated with flying in flat light. Never fly until you only have one exterior visual reference left. One reference is not enough.
The thing that makes it so challenging is the loss of visual cues and references, particularly in a landing phase when you're coming close to the ground and getting your closure rates. If you don't have a reference, you have no idea how fast or how high you are.
When you have a good reference point, try not to lose sight of it at any time. Plan your approaches so that your reference is always on your side during turns. Never turn away from your reference point. Fly with your head facing straight forward and believe what your instruments are showing you. Getting caught in a no visual reference situation can be fatal. Your physical awareness tells you that you are flying straight and level, but you may actually be in a spiral dive with a centrifugal force pressing against you. Having no visual reference enhances this illusion. Remember that just because you have good references outside the cockpit does not mean that it is safe to continue. There can be snow-covered terrain not visible in the direction you're traveling. If you're flying around a lake, fly alongside the shores using them for a reference point. Even if you can see the other side, realize that your depth perception may be poor and it's easy to fly into the surface without being aware of your altitude. If you must cross the lake, check the altimeter at a good clearance height while you have a good reference point, and don't descend below that altitude. The same rules apply to seemingly flat areas of snow. If you don't have good references, avoid going there. Be on the lookout for other traffic in the area, as they may be using the same reference point you're using. The chances are greater of colliding with someone traveling in the same direction as you than those flying in the opposite direction. Low ceilings have caught many pilots off guard. Clouds do not always form parallel to the surface or the same altitude. Pilots may try to compensate for this by flying with a slight bank and thus creating a descending turn.
To keep yourself out of trouble, is, let's say, for instance, you're going to go to a destination and the cloud ceiling is starting to lower. And I've seen this a number of times with people. And what they'll do is follow the cloud layer, the bottom of it, down towards the ground. And pretty soon what happens, if it gets lower and lower and lower, for instance, you're down at the bottom of the V with no ideas. What are you going to do? Am I going to turn around? Whereas what maybe you ought to think about is right at the very first, pick the altitude that you're most comfortable with above the ground, go to that altitude, and let the clouds come down to you. Therefore, your decision is made for you when you in fact reach the end of the V. You can see it coming. Here comes the clouds. I'm going to have to do something. So it's time to turn around. You're making the decision rather than following this cloud deck right on top of yourself.
Be conscious of your altitude when flying over glaciers. The glaciers may be rising faster than you are climbing. As you can see, there are many factors that come into play when dealing with flat light and whiteout conditions. Your instinctual responses must be immediate from a well-thought-out plan. Whiteout conditions can occur at any time during flat light conditions. Flat light can happen on the sunniest of days when passing into a shaded terrain. The environment can present challenging obstacles which make your flight even more difficult. Probably the most dangerous part about flying in flat light conditions is its insidious nature. Completing a safe flight in any condition may mean choosing an alternate landing site or returning to the point of departure, where the known conditions were better. Pilots need to establish your own personal minimums, set strict parameters for landings and stick by them, and educate yourself. Education would include instrument proficiency, talk to local operators, physiological effects, aeromedical effects, and psychological effects, and the FAA Advisory Circular number 60-4A.
Is to get some training with somebody that's familiar with a whiteout or a flat light condition, both those conditions, and get some mentoring from somebody that's knowledgeable in that so that they can show you some tricks of the trade and to help you survive one of those encounters. And that's what we don't understand is how many people actually get caught in a whiteout and, you know, fatality-wise, because all we find is the wreckage in the middle of the tundra, and nobody understands how it happens. But to me, that leads me to believe that those people got involved in something like a whiteout or a flat light condition and just lost the control of the aircraft and consequently paid for it with their lives. So some training is vitally important.
Flat light and whiteout conditions are serious business when it comes to flying. Many lives have been lost in these conditions. Know your limitations and acknowledge them.
I mean, just in a wide open field on snow, it's a dangerous situation. You'd have to almost fly it as a controlled instrument approach. Very shallow rate of descent, wings level, and feel your way down.
As you make that turn, especially if you're close to the ground, you can't see the horizon, you can't see the ground because of this whiteout condition. And so now your reference has to be your altimetry to tell you how high above the ground you were. And as you make that turn and come back to where you can see a horizon again.
Even though we're well trained and we go out and we practice this every day, and we have a four-man crew and full instrumentation on the aircraft, sometimes the conditions are so bad that we do have to turn around and come back, and we can't proceed on with the rescue mission.
I'd be sitting there in this airplane, engine just droning along, no turbulence, sitting in the airplane by myself, and all of a sudden I think, you start thinking you're in the twilight zone. Because you don't really feel like you're flying in an airplane. You just feel like you're just sitting in this, almost like a simulator. And the same thing even in a whiteout condition. You feel like you're flying, like I said, in the milk bottle, but you still feel like your cockpit is all you have right there. You don't have anything outside. You might as well forget about outside because it doesn't exist. And sometimes I've been tempted to just wiggle the airplane to see if I was actually really flying.
Whenever there aren't any shadows out there and you have obstructions that are the same color as the terrain, then you're going to have a flat light condition, which could be important if you're landing somewhere that has snow berms. The snow berms and the runway and everything is all the same color, so if there's no sunshine and it's overcast, there won't be any perception of a snow berm there, and you could be landing and there'll be a 20-foot berm right next to you and you won't see it.
You need to have a good trust in the equipment that you're flying in order to trust it when you really need it too.
If you're caught somewhere in a whiteout and you have to take off, my recommendation is you don't take off. The best thing is just to go to the shore. If you have a shoreline, build a fire, wait it out. If you sit in a whiteout condition and you have enough get-home-itis that you have to get out of there in a whiteout condition, your chances of survival are diminished rapidly. You could lose an engine or have a mechanical problem 15 feet in the air, and then you're not going to know where you're at. And that's going to be even worse yet. So that's what always concerns me. And my thing is, if you don't like the weather, you just wait 15 minutes, and it's going to change. You know, so my recommendation on any whiteout type departure, you just don't do it.